Well, thank you so much for being here. And for our last panel, our panelists will discuss the importance of preserving the Assyrian language and strategies for language preservation and revitalization. So join me in welcoming our last panelists for today. Thank you.
Because we're running a little bit behind schedule, I'm going to skip the fancy intro. I know a lot of people here are really interested in the discussion around the preservation of the Assyrian language. I'm going to go ahead and let our panelists introduce themselves. You've heard a lot from my colleague, Ator Sargon, who of course is the vice chair of the Assyrian Policy Institute. So I'm going to go ahead and have Ramina quickly introduce herself.
Shalom alochon. Ana Ramina Shmuel or Samuel. I'm a school counselor at District 219, and I also co-sponsor Assyrian Club at Niles North High School and co-sponsor an Assyrian parent group that goes by Suraya. And I am a vice president in Bet Kanu, so that's also of an interest to me.
Hello, my name is Sergis Yonan. I'm originally from Turlock, California. Currently reside in San Jose, California. I'm not a linguist or a language expert by any means, but I like to just think of myself as a regular Assyrian person who tries to elevate the language as much as I can in my life. And I do so in my past. I've created tools that help people use the language digitally, and a couple of the projects I'm working on right now revolve around language preservation and the advancement of the Assyrian language in the technological age. Yeah. Oh, actually, I would like to mention just real quick, just so some of these projects are related to stuff that a lot of different people are working on, and hopefully I can kind of chime in. So if you're interested in any of the things we talk about today, just please find me after.
Sounds good. A regular guy that does incredible work. Okay. I also would like to briefly acknowledge that originally we had planned to also have Caroline Benjamin, who is also from District 219 on this panel. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it. And we also had Dr. Ephraim Yildiz, who is the Vice Chancellor at the University of Salamanca. Unfortunately, due to an unforeseen scheduling conflict, he also could not be here, but we look forward to having them at future events and discussions. But we're going to go ahead and dive right in. We're going to start with a big question. When we look at the status of the use of the Assyrian language today, it's something that's been talked about already. It's widely understood that the use of the Assyrian language is on the decline. Can you share some of the factors from your perspectives that you think are contributing to this trend? We'll start with you.
Sure. So again, I'm not an expert, but I do have lived experiences as an Assyrian who was born in diaspora. And that's a really good question, because I think a lot of people like to attribute it to maybe that the language is impractical, or it's not very, it's not going to benefit you later in life. But I don't think that's even close to the truth. I think the bigger issue is actually accessibility to high quality education over years of early development. That's something that's absent in a lot of communities with even high density populations of Assyrians. For example, I grew up in Turlock, and we did have Assyrian courses, but is it something that we all did? No. Is it something that was sustained over years of life? Not necessarily. And it's even more of a challenge if you don't live in a community with that high of a concentration of Assyrians. So my answer to that is accessibility, access to education.
And Ramina, would you like to add?
Yeah, so we have the more obvious or researched factors that other communities deal with as well. And I would like to start with assimilation, and I know that was mentioned earlier. The generations before us that came here, they wanted to assimilate. They wanted to be white. And that included not just by race and how we looked, how we acted, but also language. So that's important to acknowledge. The other piece is, I think, just the educational side of it. So some of our families are not aware of the benefits of speaking more than one language. So they are trying to assimilate. In addition to that, they're also not aware of when they should learn the language. So as you know, most research shows that if you really want to attain language at a native speaker level, that needs to happen before the age of 11 or 10. And then we also have the systems in place. So I know we mentioned a lot of like colonization. Sometimes those systems are seen in communities outside of us, but also in schools. So I can give you examples within our own schools. We have a big population of Assyrians where I work, but we also have a lot of our own Assyrians with their students or parents not reporting Assyrian as their home language and reporting English or maybe other languages. That's part of assimilation. That's going under the system, trying to not be labeled, trying not to be assessed further, because you have the ELL label, possibly being assessed further if you are fluent in English. So some of our families and communities are trying to avoid that completely. They want to fit in. The more personalized, from my own experience, I would say exposure. So that came up as well in many conversations prior. I immigrated here in 2004. I speak 2 different sub-dialects of Surat, and I would say I'm more comfortable with one of them because it's my mother's dialect and my grandmother's. So Ashitnae, if anyone knows, so Surat. And I found myself more comfortable speaking fully when I am in spaces that speak that dialect. And back home in Iraq, go atra, go betnahran, go ashur, however you want to define it. We had more opportunities, whether through Assyrian schools or communities, to speak to each other in our own dialects, so not switch over. And we were comfortable doing that, and I think that helped us attain our language. So we need to do more of that. We need to create more spaces. I've seen some young groups do that, but we need more circles of that in our community.
Thank you. You both have been involved on multiple fronts on this issue of Assyrian language preservation. Ramina, your work on or through Betkanu and Serious, of course, through technology and things like Assyrian Wordle and whatnot. Before we dive into those projects more deeply, because I think we want to hear more about them, I'd like to know from both of you, what is it that motivates you to do this work? So I guess you mentioned that you do this really in your free time and it's just something that you're passionate about. What motivates you to do this work?
Sure. My main motivation to do this sort of work is to help others, I guess, produce more written culture. I think a lot of the time we speak about the language, it's going to die in a generation or two, and a lot of other pessimistic things. But imagine what world we'd be in, let's say, 20 years or 30 years if we didn't have access to a high-quality translator, for example, or better input devices, speech-to-text, that sort of thing. So my main motivation for doing this work is that I'm somewhat in the space, the technological space, and I do want to see more Assyrians producing more written culture, more poetry, more literature. I mean, how often do you see a novel written in Assyrian, right? How often is a work of fiction published in Assyrian? Maybe, I can think of maybe like a handful a year, if that, maybe 1 or 2. And if I, in any capacity, could help, over, obviously it'd be over many years, but if I could contribute in any way to help somebody create more Assyrian written media or literature, that would make me very happy. So that's something I strive to do.
Well, I think it's safe to say that you have done that already. So
Well, step by step.
And Ramina, we'd love to hear more about what drives you. Is my mic working, by the way? Yeah? Okay.
So I know my field is very different than linguistics or
Sure.
language. I'm actually a counselor, so it's more of the social emotional. But what motivates me about culture and language and I want to share this even though it's personal because a lot of you are young or are young parents or parents to be. It started from home. So my love for my culture and my language started from home. It started with my parents enrolling me in Assyrian schools back home. And then once we were here, when we immigrated in 2004, I had no interest in like being in a choir or like some other activities that I was not in back home. But they ensured that I had that exposure. They made sure that I were part of groups. I was reading Assyrian texts so that I would not lose my language. And from that, I had that connection and I was motivated to share that, not just to grow as a person and learn more because there's so much to learn from our language, but also give back to the community. And if I have a minute to or less to share this
Take your
piece.
time,
So
please
our
do.
language is a true treasure. I'm going to read this so I don't mess it up. There are so many folds. You can learn so much history. You can analyze our progress. You can unfold how oppression influenced it. Our language is the history that our schools and governments, whether here or back home, never taught us. It is what breaks those barriers that exist within our nation. The more you learn Assyrian in all of its glory and dialects, the more you realize that we are all one.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. So the two of you have the same goal, ultimately, right? It's to contribute to the preservation of the Assyrian language and to make Assyrian language learning more accessible, but you obviously work in very different spaces. Sargis, I'm going to ask you, what role do you see technology playing in the preservation of the Assyrian language, and what opportunities exist now that maybe didn't exist 10 years ago?
Okay, so, before the pandemic, we often, we still do, we refer to our language as a primarily spoken language. But think about how your communication has changed throughout the pandemic, right? In any language, whatever language you speak. We're primarily on our computers now. We're taking meetings from home, and that might actually be more of a permanent thing than anybody thought just even 2-3 years ago, right? I personally have a fear that if we don't develop the language using what technology is available right now, that we will be left behind. Our language will be left behind. If we keep our language as a purely analog form of communication, I do not believe it could survive. And that goes for any language, actually. So technology, I think, could help in 2 different ways. One is preservation. If you're not familiar with the language, for example, technology could help you learn the language or develop better language skills. You might know the language already, but could you give a formal presentation in the language? And I think that's something technology could help with. But it could also help advance the language, right? We're not just trying to preserve the language. We've been doing that. We should also continue to advance the language. It's not just about speaking the same way we did for the last 100 years. You have to actually use the language and make new words. It's that simple. So technology could help us do that. And whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I think if we're looking at it, let's say, was it 10 years? 10 years from now, at least I'd like to believe that in 10 years we could develop optical character recognition. We'll have more of a formalized language, although it is a bit difficult to do that without an actual language academy, which we do not have. Translation tools, obviously, speech to text, that sort of thing it's a little heartbreaking because we kind of live in this age where our phones and computers can speak. They can literally speak with you in so many different languages, but they can't even read and write in Assyrian yet. So there's a huge gap. But in 10 years' time, with enough people angry about the status quo, I think we could do a lot with technology. So that's something that also, that's a big motivator for me personally, and I'm sure a lot of other people in the room.
And just along the lines of, keeping up with trends and keeping up with technology and whatnot, just quickly by a show of hands, how many people in here have tried Mamlel, the Assyrian wordle? Okay, looks like there's a bunch of people in here. I'm just curious, what sort of inspired you to create an Assyrian version of Wordle, and what was that process like?
Okay, so as you know, I may or may not have worked on keyboards with the language.
May or may not.
And after doing some related projects, I was really happy. Genuinely, I heard a lot of really heartwarming stories of people's grandmothers typing on a phone for the first time.
Yeah.
I was like,
yeah.
so the reason for Memled was kind of just to proliferate that, kind of sustain that energy behind it. I remember thinking at the time, I don't know how many websites are purely in the Assyrian language, right? I thought back, and I remember there was a Zoa website. It was they had a translated version of the Assyrian website. I remember going on there and clicking around. It was cool, but I couldn't think of another, especially a secular website that was literally just in Assyrian. You couldn't click out into English or Arabic, and I was why? I kind of want to prove okay, is it possible? Yeah, obviously it's possible, but could it be popular? And I was really happy to see that it was pretty popular. The first couple of weeks, I put an analytics thing on it. So
of course you did.
It was pretty cool. There were 500 to 1,000 daily users every day, and it was pretty interesting. I should print this out at some point.
Well, it was trending on Assyrian Twitter. I had FOMO. I don't read and write Assyrian, so I felt left out, but everyone was talking about it.
Yeah, right. It was pretty interesting because it gives you a graph of by countries, how many active users there are, and it was pretty interesting. It was a literal breakdown. It was a divided breakdown of our diaspora population. It was
Where was it the most popular?
It was most popular in the United States, I think, by a good amount, followed by Iraq, actually. And I think to this day, actually, Iraq has the highest number of daily users, which is cool.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm going to turn to Romina then. We spoke earlier today a little bit about some of the efforts that you and Caroline and others have undertaken at District 219 to make available an accredited Assyrian language course. Can you talk a little bit more about that project, what your goals are, and what that process has been like?
I want to emphasize that this effort was not from an individual level or one or two or few people. It started from our parents in 2015, and they voiced that there was a great need to educate Assyrians and offer Assyrian as a world language in a district where roughly 30% of the district is Assyrian. So it's been about 8 years, but there were a lot of barriers and challenges. But our parents continued their pressure and ask, and I think that's really important to mention. And in addition to that, the students, our kids themselves. So we've had many meetings, full lecture rooms with students and parents. Many times we've been told no for different reasons, very systemic reasons. More recently, I would say as a district, we've been spending more efforts in terms of equity training for our educators and our administrators. So the equity lens has really helped us, and this is where the allyship like finding your true allies, which usually are for us are people of color. Because we are also people of color, even though we check off the white box. Our needs are of people of color, and we fall under that. So when there was progress made with that, and even with our efforts to bring in educators to educate our teachers, we've had Hannibal Travis, we've had Rain, who's an alumni, we've had Ashlina Hartun for mental health education. So we continue to bring in educators, and hopefully we'll have some of you during Institute Days, what we call our days.
And just to clarify, so that's educating your staff and teachers on the needs of the Assyrian community.
Yes, and as a result, then you have more allyship and support when you are presenting something like the Assyrian language and culture class. In addition to that, we do have, so I was referencing parents, so that falls under the equity department within our district as well. We have what we call the Suraye parent group, the Assyrian parent group, and that consists of a few Assyrian staff who work as a bridge to voice the needs of our Assyrian community. And so that was used to make those requests. But we made proposals. I joined in 2018, but before I joined in 2018, we were able to offer the class as a summer class. But with summer school, there are barriers. So, you know, especially with immigration,
Sports and summer activities people work.
Right, or like immigrants, usually you're trying to go travel, go back home, and or visit relatives,
Sure.
you know, in Australia or somewhere. We're all scattered. So very bad timing for our students, our kids, to take a class in the summer. And then there was the financial need as well. So many barriers. The first class we had about, let me do this.
And Ramina, just to confirm, the first class that was offered in the summer was not a credited course, so it didn't fulfill their graduation requirements, correct?
Right, so the summer class was just an elective course. A lot of times when students are taking summer classes, they're taking courses for credit recovery. So it was a general elective credit, so not that interesting for someone to give up their summer and also pay a fee for, even though we worked with organizations and parents to fundraise for it. But I do want to go back to 2018, or sorry, go back to the timeline.
The timeline.
In terms
okay,
of-
sorry, I thought you meant go back.
Yeah.
Of course, now it's not going to work. There we go.
Alright.
So we had more than one offering, but it kind of died off because we were not having enough students signing up for the summer class. But in 2018, our parents, again, voiced their concerns, and we worked really hard, and we had a summer course again. And we had about 20 students enrolled, and then the pandemic hit, and we switched from in-person to virtual, and this is where some of the things that you mentioned, we don't have a virtual Assyrian class that we had access to in terms of the system that our school was using. So what happened with that effort that we had about 20 students registered, that was canceled. And that gave us another opportunity to go back and ask for the school year, the World Language Accredited course. But with that come many barriers. So we were told that, you know, it was not at our district level, even though as educators within the district we were going through multiple channels, you know, proposing a curriculum, going through our curriculum committee, working with the World Language Department, with the Equity Department. We were, you know, kind of going back and forth. And it went to the state level. So that's where the ISB piece came in. And finally, we had some help. So we had tried to do everything as educators, as parents, as students. And then we needed that push, that community push on the politics level. And we were lucky enough to have Ator Sergon and Reynhanna within our community, within the district. And I'll let Ator kind of jump in terms of how that went with the state.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Romina. And thank you for having me. As you can see, I'm just here to kind of supplement the panel and kind of add my thoughts in the process. And an activist asked us today a little bit about this, which we'll share. But she talked about a roadmap, right? Like, what are the steps that you guys had to take to get here? And there's really no clear path. We'll start there. As Romina mentioned, this has been something that's been years and years in the making, and we've hit a lot of roadblocks. And so many times we'd go to administration and we'd say, what's the checklist? Give us number 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll take it from there. But the truth is, there wasn't a clear roadmap for us, and that's why we had to kind of activate all parts of our community. You heard from Romina that our parents and students were already in the process of taking these classes. Unfortunately, because they were in the summer and they were costly to some of the students, there were some barriers. But then at this point, after the pandemic, we actually, based on some of the connections we made in the state of Illinois through our advocacy, through elected officials, we got in touch with one of our state reps who set up a meeting with the Illinois State Board of Education. We tried to schedule a meeting with ISB, the acronym, for months and months. We called, we emailed, and we just couldn't even get someone to respond just to set up a meeting so that we can ask what this roadmap is. What are the steps that we need to take to have Assyrian added as a world language, which we found out later. These are more steps in the process. But within, I would say, just a few days, our state rep was able to contact someone in Springfield, our state capital, to get a meeting set with these Assyrian educators, some of us Assyrian elected officials and advocates, to sit down and spell out what the next steps would be for us. Based on that conversation, we've made leaps and bounds in having Assyrian added as a world language. And Romina, if you want to develop more on this, she and her colleagues developed course curriculum. They recommended 10 classes to be added to the Illinois State curriculum under world languages. 9 of those 10 courses were accepted and added to our Illinois course catalog. And so I think that advocacy, just knowing the right people to talk to, seeing that we had a voice, going to public meetings. We talked about that earlier, 812 public comments. We had people write in, and that's something that we helped with as the API. We're able to help populate letters. Language is a barrier. The English language is a barrier for a lot of our community members. So to the extent that we could make it easy for them to contact their elected officials, we're now much more prepared than ever to tackle these issues. And so I think we've had a lot of success in that way. And so I'll turn it back to Romina.
I do want to mention some of the hardships or kind of pushback that we had, because I think we come across those conversations in any level, whether back home or here. So I remember hearing conversations or questions about, like, why Assyrian? Why not Arabic? Or what would you do with Assyrian after high school or beyond college? Whoever it is, they always give you an alternative. So not Assyrian, but here's a better thing. And we do need to push back. First, we have to see the value of our own language. And then we can work on convincing others, because it is happening. So right now, it is not an approved course yet. Again, a very, very long process. So what we are doing this summer is we were approved to work on a curriculum this summer with the World Language Department. The course is for high schoolers. The plan is to have an Assyrian language level 1, but also an Assyrian for native or heritage speakers. Because when we are heritage or native speakers, no matter what, you've had some exposure to the language, whether by hearing it or by seeing some text. That's very different than if it's someone who is experiencing it for the first time. And you heard some students that were in attendance today from District 219 or alumni. Because we are a significant population within the district, non-Assyrians are very interested very interested in learning our language and culture. So the course is inclusive. It's not the traditional way of how we've used to like teach Assyrian, whether back home or Sunday schools and so on. It's to be modeled after the world languages that are offered at the high school level. So it will be modeled under or followed the world language standards. Not sure if I'm missing.
And just to confirm, so next steps are to get it approved at the district level. So you've gotten the approval from the Illinois State Board of Education on the proposed courses, and now you're working at the district level, correct?
Yes. So I believe the courses are slated to be on the catalog for 22-23. So hopefully once that's available, that we can publish or share that with you all. And on our end at the school level, once we finish the summer project, we are going back in the fall around September and presenting it to our curriculum committee. And we hope that it will be approved. And so if it is approved by the curriculum committee, it goes to the Board of Education. So District 219 board, they also have to vote on it. And from there, it would be offered for the following school year, hopefully. Yeah. And that would be for the 23-24 school year. I want to also highlight we've had so many students that already graduated that have been part of this process, and they've been passionate about this, even though they will not be able to take the class. But this is, it's not about me, it's not about the next person, it's for the future. So.
It's incredible, and I just want to say again, 8 years they've been working on this, and it's remarkable that you have persevered, and now, fortunately, or hopefully, we'll have a positive outcome at the end of this. So, one last question for both of you from me, and then we'll turn it to the audience. Just sort of broadly speaking, collectively as a community, and Sargis, maybe we can start with you. What are steps that you think that we need to take to aid, in Assyrian language preservation?
Well, I think individually we can all maybe do our part by learning the language more. Whether you're just starting or you already know it a good amount, I mean, there's always more to learn. There's very few actual experts, I believe. So just take it upon yourself. Try to text your friends in Assyrian. Try to text your family in Assyrian. Try to speak more Assyrian. I have a good tip, actually. If you're trying to kind of develop your reading and writing skills, find a song, an Assyrian song you really like, and try to write it down in Assyrian. And actually look into the roots of every word that you don't know. And if you do that enough times, you'll get so much better. It's really crazy.
That's a good tip.
I think that's a really good trick. And then I think on a community level, we have a lot of really, intelligent, smart, talented people in our community. And I think we're all pretty stubborn. Dr. Guedga said, we refuse to be erased, and I think that's very true. So if you're into that kind of stuff, if you like technology and if you're good at math and you want to do more language stuff, get involved. There's a lot of people who are into this sort of thing. And if you want to start somewhere, if you don't know anyone, just feel free to reach out to me.
Thanks, Sargis. And Romina, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
I would say, or I would ask you to continue supporting any organizations or individuals that are creating more resources. So we have individuals and we have some organizations, as I mentioned, I am part of Bitkano. But we need more of that. It's not enough. We can't just depend on one organization, one individual. And then one thing I learned for sure through this process is that, and I really don't like politics, but I understood the significance of politics even when we think it's not politics. So even in this case of requesting a world language class in Assyrian, politics had a big hand in making it happen. So if you have an interest, if you have the credentials, the background, please get involved and take these ladies here as a role model and run for local positions, whether it's at the school level, at the town, village, and so on, because that will make a difference.
Thanks. Well, I am going to turn it over to the audience. I'm sure there are questions. Please raise your hand. Remember, questions only.
Yes, I'm going to echo that. Questions only.
Questions
Appreciate the
only.
comments, but we could do that tomorrow during the workshop. Jamie.
This question is for Sergis. So we've talked about your projects like Memlel, the potential maybe or may not keyboard. But could you talk about some current projects you're working on related to language preservation?
I think the most important / most critical thing that we're working on is actually with Emil over here in the third row. That's Emil. He's a good friend of mine. We're working on Unicode language standardization, and it's basically a series of standardizing ways of, like, how do you say the months of the year? How do you say the days of the week? And this sort of thing is very important because it'll end up feeding down into everybody's phone and computer. So like you can go into your computer and change your language to Assyrian, and like all of a sudden all your dates are formatted in Assyrian, and I think that's pretty important. I mean, that's just kind of like, we're talking about the basics. We're working on the basics right now. But that's the most critical thing that I think we're working on. That's probably my favorite project right now. But at the same time, and this is a much bigger project we've been working on for a long time now, is generating an actual modern corpus. So literally a gigantic word bank from various sources, like actual modern sources. We actually have, we were really lucky actually in the 20th century to have several periodicals in Assyrian. So that's really useful. We have a lot of literature actually in the last couple of hundred years even. So from that we can generate what's called a corpus, which is a gigantic word bank. And then from that we can actually start making spell checkers and autocomplete and predictive text and all these things that like will catch us up very rapidly once we have. But we're kind of we're in like the first couple of stages of that right now. But I'm very optimistic about that project.
Fascinating. That's stuff I didn't even think of. That's very cool. Another question.
Unicode? Sure. Oh, yeah. That's a good point. Unicode just it's a standardization community. They don't deal with just languages. They also deal with all kinds of standardization when it comes to computers. But they are kind of the globally recognized consortium of language standardization. So like, for example, if you're typing Shlama on your phone, the 4 letters are actually defined by Unicode. Like this number corresponds to a she and this letter corresponds to, yeah. So it's a standardization committee.
Okay, next question.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Michael. My question is for my good friend Sergis, who, for the record, I did not meet because we were both in the 209, but I met him because we went to the same Twitter. So just so everyone knows that. My question for you is, you were talking about how when you developed Memlel, you made this comment of like people's grandmas like typing, in Assyrian for the first time, like on a website on their phone, which I was like, wow, that's a big deal. You don't think about that. So in the same breath, what kind of epiphanies or realizations did you have when you were developing that keyboard that you thought like, wow, we are so lacking this, or wow, think of what we could do with that? Did you have any?
Actually, I kind of had an inspiration for that. I remember my grandmother's Armenian, and she had never like used a smartphone in her life, and actually changed my keyboard to Armenian, and she was just writing on my phone, and that was like I was like, why can't everybody do that? Why can't everybody communicate in whatever language they happen to know? I mean, they might not know the dominant language of wherever they live, but like they have a native language, and oftentimes they're literate in that language. So I guess that's more so my inspiration, the genesis of it. But yeah, I'm angry, so I just want, like, my anger keeps me going.
Good. Angry people get stuff done.
We have a couple more.
We'll take, depending on how quick this goes, we might take 2.
Okay, here.
Thank you. Actually, I do have two questions for two panelists.
Sure.
One, Sergis, Lasher great job. I definitely see a great result out of it because we're all typing in Assyrian on our phones, and that's very effective. However, if I may suggest, there is another group, another person that has developed the not just the software, the solution. The OCR is already functioning
The
right now.
Vision.
Yes,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
OCR is already functioning,
Yeah.
and the ASCII was already written 40 years ago
Yeah.
for the Assyrian language.
So-
So if you are not familiar with them, perhaps I would love to connect you, because instead of reinventing the wheels, it would be great to work on a massive project together. So, but I applaud you. It's great that the desire is there, and you have been so effective for that. Thank you for that.
So I think, just to quickly respond, I believe you're talking about Atur and Sergon Hesso.
No, yes, Sergon Hasu,
And-
Professor
and,
Hasu.
And his friend Atur, right?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
Atur does the OCR. So actually,
Yeah.
I'm in really
So
close
you're in
contact.
contact
We're
with
good
them.
friends. Yeah,
Okay.
They're the ones who are doing a lot of that
Yeah,
work, actually.
I was referring to Dr. Hasu, who developed the ASCII many
Yeah, he's one
decades
of,
ago.
Yeah,
Sounds
that's
like you guys are
1992.
coordinating closely.
Great.
So.
That's wonderful. I just wanted to hear
But
that.
thank you. I appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other question, comment is for Romina. The development of the Assyrian language curriculum was something that the Assyrian American Association of San Jose, in cooperation with Dr. Aryan Ishaya, worked on and brought it into fruition. We got the accredited course through San Jose State University. Was it Dr. Aryan? Probably around 2013 or 14. The problem with continuation of this course, or I even saw your course, or in the future courses, is the number of students that are registering for these courses. So for that course, it was also, it was accredited, but the students would have to pay money, and the association was even providing the funding for that. It was providing the subsidy for these courses, so it's not a burden on the students, and they would just sign up. It won't discourage them. But it was very hard to get Assyrian students to sign up for this class. We had Italian, we had Vietnamese, we had Chinese sign up for the course, and we had to sign up ourselves just to have enough number of people so the university would not drop it off. But unfortunately, ultimately got to a point that the number of students were so low and we could not keep it up. It still has not been officially dropped out of the semesters. It's just they're waiting to bring it up when there is demand for it. My point is, what you're doing is great, but the desire has to be there to learn our language, to continue preserving our language, and that desire starts from meetings and presentations like this. I want to bring an example. Nino Suerda, I don't know if you read his book on Assyrian genocide and international law. About 10 years ago, he presented his book at one of the programs that we had at the association in San Jose. By the time he was done, we were all at awe that how this young boy, that now he's probably in his 30s, how this young boy was able to present such complex language of law in two languages simultaneously, in Assyrian and English, that everybody in that room, whether they were fluent in English or Assyrian, they could understand it. They could understand all those complex legal terms in both languages, in whatever language they were fluent in. What I'm saying is that starts from young ages, from early ages, that your brain is wired to think in both languages and to be able to speak both languages almost simultaneously. So that comes with the practice also. Desire starts with the family and getting the practice within your own small circles. Yes, I understand in these kind of presentations, sometimes we have to speak in English because we want to reach out a larger audience that speaks English. But in our small groups, we can practice more on our language. And of course, you're the young future that
Thank you.
would have to get
Thank
your
you,
families.
Michelle. And just to confirm, so I think the question that maybe you should respond to is just the demand for the course. And I think there are some differences between a university level course and a high school course, but maybe you can respond to some of that.
Yeah, so it on?
I think so.
So I want to go back again and highlight that this course is coming to fruition. It's happening because there is a desire, there is an interest from the community. It's coming from parents and from students. We do have in the Chicago area universities that have offered the Assyrian class, whether it was termed under a different term, Aramaic and so on, that have faced similar challenges or not enough students signing up for it, or in our case in summer school. But if it is offered during the school year, most universities for high school students require at least 2 years of a world language. So there is a big demand. Not only that, there is competition because obviously there are other world languages that we're dealing with. We have surveyed our kids, our community more than once, and they have shown a great interest. I think I failed to mention this, but our district actually houses more than one school. 2 major high schools, so Niles North, Niles West, and each has more than 2,000 students. So if you combine those, and remember my percentage of us being about 30% of that, that's just Assyrians, that's a huge number. And then of course we have non-Assyrians that are also interested because they're interacting with us, they're also part of the community. So there's definitely a desire there. And I agree with everything that you said, and I know Nino Suarda, he's in the family.
Thank you. This is going to be our last question.
Hi, my question is for Ramina and maybe the API team. So we live in Sterling Heights, which is basically like the Skokie of Michigan.
Got it. That's a really good way to explain it. Thank you.
And all the schools there, K through 12, are heavily populated by our community. So I was just wondering, what were the strong persuasive points that you guys had that helped you move it along? And I actually have a follow-up question, is I understand you guys are still in the stages of making it happen, and I really appreciate that you guys showed the long path. Like, it's not just like an instant success, you know, it took a lot to get there. So first question, what are some of the strong persuasive points? Like, is it the population? Is it the, like, what was most persuasive from your perspective? And the follow-up question is, how, like, translatable do you think this will be to other cities that are heavily populated?
It's a great question.
I can speak a little bit to that, unless you want to go first, Ramina.
You can go first. I'll follow
You
up.
know, I think Ramina said something that was really interesting, that politics played a big hand in this. And so for us, just being grassroots kind of organizers and being in an election and organizing the Assyrian community to show impact in elections really opened my eyes to see kind of what influence we could really have. And so some of that was trying to retrain our community to kind of take a step away from that fear of asking for something they want, or complaining, or going to a board meeting. These are all really foreign things for our community. So we actually had a bishop from one of our churches attend a public meeting. We were really aggressively pursuing that approach, showing that our community is interested in this, it desires it, is going to be at the public meetings. We're going to sign petitions. We're going to post on Facebook. We're going to aggressively pursue it, as other communities do, as is their right, as is our right to aggressively pursue and demand what we want. These are our needs. This is what we want. And we have to show our forces in numbers. And so I, in my perspective, in the lane that I am most familiar with, I think the political piece in organizing our community was extremely effective in bringing this to fruition.
And I want to add, so we did have the numbers for years and years. I mean, the Syrian community within that area goes back to the 90s or even 80s. I mean, I see it in the yearbook pictures. So it wasn't just that. So we had the numbers, we had the interest, representation outside of school on the politics level, but even before that, representation within the school itself.
Right.
So my colleagues, Caroline Benjamin, and the rest of my colleagues within the Syrian parent group had attempted more than once, and you know there were classes that were run in the summer. But it was difficult when there was no Assyrian teacher, no Assyrian educator. So, some professional educator license, having that. So representation matters. So if you are in education, if you are interested in moving your community forward, if you have that love to kind of move and find where your community is and working within those schools, that matters too. So representation within and outside on the politics level as well.
Great. Well, Romina and Sergis will be part of the language workshop tomorrow. So if you have comments, questions, we can certainly continue this discussion throughout the weekend and beyond. Can you maybe share ways that people can get in touch with you or follow you?
Sure. You can talk to me here if you're interested. But my email address is my first name SARGIS at my last name YONAN.org. So if anyone's watching this later, just email me.
And maybe, Romina, how people can follow BitKanu?
You can find BitKanu on the website or on different social media platforms. So it's BETKANU. If you're interested in getting in touch with me, I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, that would be fine. And then my email is my first name dot last name, so romina.samuel@gmail if you need anything.
Wonderful. Thank you both. I think I speak on behalf of everyone in this room and many people who are not here. Thank you so much for your work and your dedication to this project. It really is remarkable. And, I think you can already see the impact that has been made in many ways. And we look forward to seeing what's next with the course and, Sergis, what's next for you. So thank you both. And I just want to say thank you for being here, and thank you to our audience for being wonderful and patient and sticking around to hear from these wonderful speakers. Stephanie, I believe, is going to come up, just offer a couple closing remarks, and then we'll adjourn for the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Today has been absolutely incredible. I think we can all unanimously agree on that. Thank you so much to all of our attendees and our speakers. It's really been an honor to be among such accomplished and genuine individuals. Really, couldn't say more to that. We will reconvene here at 6:30 p.m. for the Assyrians in Modern Iraq book talk with Elda Benjamin. It'll be moderated by Asur Sergun. After that, we'll have the chance to experience the Diaspora in Bloom Take 2 exhibit, which is hosted by Akadina Yadigar and Nardine Sarkis. Thank you all again for choosing to be here. It really means a lot. We can't wait to see you guys shortly. Thanks.